right, good morning, everyone. I'm Lauren Breen. I have two hats on this morning. I teach at SUNY Buffalo Law School, and I also am a supervising attorney at the Western New York Law Center. So we're delighted to have a room full of people here. We're so excited that we have volunteer attorneys. It's just about a year now since we started planning this project. Claro, I don't know if it says this in your materials, but it's Civil Legal Advice and Resource Office, and it probably has taken me a year to get that right. I always want to say consumer for the C there. So we have an ambitious agenda this morning. I think we are going to take questions throughout the training, but if it looks like the questions are going to prevent us from keeping on track, I think we'll have to save the questions for the break, which is at 10:45, and after 12:30 when the training. Okay. All right. I'm so happy to introduce our esteemed panel here. I have Jim, I have you at the top here, so I'm just going to go in the order. And Brooke Denzing is in the back, so just because we have limited room in the front right now. Jim, you were my first lawyer boss back in 1989. But now he's at the New York State Attorney General's office, and he handles consumer and investor fraud cases. I just learned at our Claro session on Tuesday, and from the paper, that your latest endeavor is the FWS situation. So thank you, because we had a Claro visitor the other day who she lost $3,000 on a dining room set because FWS closed their doors without giving her the furniture.
Did you ever hear the expression,
back.
you can't get blood from a stone?
Yeah.
It might be the case here. We'll see.
It was a sad Claro visit. So Jim is going to talk about a couple of big cases that you brought, and more particularly about service, which is so important in the consumer default judgment world. So Brooke Denzing is in the back of the room. She's one of our Claro partners at the Buffalo Federation of Neighborhood Centers, the Hope Center, which is situated at BFNC at the Tri-Main building. We're there on Tuesday afternoons from 3 o'clock to 5 o'clock. And Brooke, you used to be at Cash, creating asset savings and hope at United Way, and about a year ago, is it, or that you moved over to BFNC? Oh, wow. So, so you counsel families dealing with economic security issues, and also I think you supervise, to a certain extent, the Cash coaches who work on the free tax preparation project at BFNC. I can tell you from personal experience that BFNC is the flagship for free tax preparation site. So thank you, Brooke, for coming today. Matthew Parham, who's right next to me, is the Claro expert consumer attorney. So many friendly faces. I'm seeing familiar faces in the audience. He started full-time at the Law Center, I think just after Labor Day. Yeah, so Vera's going to tell you exactly how the Claro model works, but essentially, you in the audience are the final piece. You're the final piece of the cast of characters for the Claro model. We have legal services attorneys, we have student attorneys, and we have volunteer attorneys. So this is a project that was started in 2006 downstate by Fordham Law School, the Furek Center for Social Justice, and the 5 boroughs in the New York City area have Claro projects, and Westchester has one. I believe Newark, New Jersey does too, but we're the first upstate Claro project. So you're the final piece of the puzzle. And we'll actually do our press conference launching the Claro project in Buffalo on January 30th. And we're really excited that Judge Fern Fisher has agreed to come here. She's the lead judge for the New York State Access to Justice program. So Matthew, getting back to Matthew, he left a very fancy job at Sullivan and Cromwell to come and start a consumer law practice here in Buffalo 2 years ago.
Yes.
Yeah. So we were delighted to be able to woo him away from his private practice and get him to come to the Law Center, where we're developing a consumer law practice. And if at the end of today's training, if you feel nervous at all about doing this work, do not worry, because Matthew is the expert attorney. He is our consumer law encyclopedia. At the Tuesday sessions and the Friday sessions are at Buffalo City Court from 10 to 12 in the morning. And now that we have the volunteer attorney piece in place, or just about to have that in place, Matthew will be there as a resource. You can ask him any questions that you have as you're working with the Claro visitor, and we'll have him there to review the papers that you prepare with the Claro visitors. So, okay, Vera Sedano is our consumer attorney and also at the Law Center, also a foreclosure defense attorney. One of the biggest areas of practice that we have at the Western New York Law Center is representing homeowners in foreclosure. We don't charge for this, and there are no income restrictions in terms of the work that we're able to do in this regard. So Vera splits her time. She actually is in charge of the Buffalo Claro project. So if you have questions about logistics for the project, is it okay to say, call Vera? I don't know if we have phone numbers in the materials, but we should probably do that at the end of the training.
We can do cards at the end.
Okay, great. So you brought cards?
I will by the end.
Okay, all right, perfect. Okay, so we're going to take a break at 10:45, and we have food for you at 10:45. So feel free to go and get a cup of coffee if you need to, use the lavatories, whatever you need. Ask questions as we go along. We do have an ambitious agenda, so we're going to try and keep on track. Okay, so who's next?
You.
You want me to do that piece? Or do you want to do that?
I can do that piece, sure.
I'm happy to do it. Want me to do it?
Sure.
Okay. I didn't realize that we have the PowerPoint over here, so that's really helpful. Claro visitors, it's a walk-in clinic on Tuesday afternoons at the Tri-Main Center, Friday mornings down at Buffalo City Court. We really have, I think, tremendous support from the Buffalo City Court judges. The supervising judge, Amadeo, has really been wonderful in terms of lending support, giving us space. We're in a courtroom on the 7th floor.
Yes.
Every Friday morning, and then in January we're going to be adding a piece, not just the walk-in clinic, but in January we'll be adding a piece where we'll be available to our Claro visitors who have court appearances to support them actually at their appearance. So they are not clients. This is limited scope advice and counsel. We'll talk a little bit more about that and the ethical implications of that a little later this morning. So it's very important that the first term you learn is Claro visitor, because that's what we call the people who come for assistance, Claro visitors. So I need to emphasize, and I'm remembering Bob Alardo told me right before I came in here, I need to emphasize that Volunteer Lawyers Project is a big partner in the Claro project. They'll be giving you your CLE credits for attending the training today, and that's contingent upon 6 hours over the next 6 months volunteering at the Claro site. Is there anything else I need to add? It's consumer law. The work generally focuses on consumer defendants in consumer credit lawsuits. So the bulk of what we do is help people vacate judgments or respond to papers in a consumer debt lawsuit. So they're, I think without exception, all defendants. Would you say that? Mm-hmm. Yeah. If we'll talk a little bit more about this when I talk about the ethics of it, but if a case is too complex to help a Claro visitor during a Claro session, there's always the opportunity to refer a case to the Western New York Law Center, where Matthew and Vera would work on it. So, so I think that's about it for introductions. Am I missing anything? Okay, so are you up next?
Yep.
Yep. Okay.
So, good morning, everyone. I'm
Vera, still. And we came up with this, I mean, we didn't come up with this, obviously. It's been in existence downstate since 2006. And the reason why it exists is because there is such a prevalent problem of consumer debt and underrepresented people in those cases. So over the last few years, there was a massive expansion of consumer debt and consumer debt litigation. Matthew will talk a little more about that later in the presentation. Most of the people in these kinds of cases are not represented. Most of them have no idea what a lawsuit is in the first place. Some, when they get a summons and complaint, don't actually believe that it is a legal document. They think that it's fake, that it's some sort of advertisement, and they pay no attention to it. So there's a lot of room for education for just society in general. And as a result of people not appearing in these actions, there is an epidemic of default judgments. It's a lot easier to get a default judgment in a consumer transaction than in any other case or area of law that I know of. And there are so many of them. There are different court procedures, but for the most part, in Supreme Court, as an example, they bypass any judges at all. So these default judgments are granted by just virtue of somebody saying, I'm owed this, and a clerk signing a default judgment. As a result of that, obviously there are liens that are placed on the property. There's more financial burden on people who are already dealing with financial issues. As an example, somebody could get a garnishment as a result of a default judgment, and in a default judgment, you're not just talking about the debt that was actually originally owed, you're talking about a lot of late fees, a lot of interest. So a lot of times it's double, triple the actual debt owed, plus the interest on the judgment, plus fees. So when people get these garnishments, they are actually repaying a lot more than the debt they owed, and it's not like they have a choice at that point, and other obligations do not get met because of it. People are also subject to unnecessary bankruptcies due to these default judgments, because that's a lot of times the first thing that they think of when there is a default judgment, or when they find out that there are judgments or lawsuits on their credit report. The first thing they think about a lot of times is a bankruptcy. And there are a lot of abusive litigation practices. When people don't know what their rights are, there's a need for a place where they can go and find out. And locally, we have a help desk, but it's manned by just one attorney, and that applies to many areas of law, not just consumer area. And she can't help everybody, so there is definitely a need for an office like Claro. So to give you a little bit of an introduction or a background for how the debt is created, there are two types of debt. There's unsecured and secured debt. So they follow different paths. The secured, the major difference between them is that with the secured debt, you have something. You have a house, you have a car, that can be taken through a foreclosure action, or it could be repossessed, and then the debtor is sued for a deficiency, and then there is a deficiency, and then it follows the unsecured debt part. So as an example, you have this wonderful chart in your materials. I think it's a little more legible than on the screen. It's on page 8. But as an example, if you think of a credit card, and that's the debt that you will meet most often with visitors to the Claro session, the debt is created at the time of default. So somebody fails to make a payment, they don't make a payment for 30 days, and they start receiving phone calls advising that the bill is past due. Nowadays, it's emails, text messages, phone calls, or sorts of means to reach out to somebody who didn't make the payment. After the 30 days of payment past due, the default is reported to credit bureaus. That's the first effect, actual effect on somebody who missed a payment. Later, the debt is transferred to an in-house collection agency or a department. They are very persistent, and they the reason for that is they're not subject to FDCPA, Federal Debt Collection Protections Act, and in-house people feel a lot more emboldened by it, so they would be a lot more forward in their attempts to contact somebody and get payments. After 6 months, if there's no success, the debt is charged off. A lot of people mistakenly believe that that means that they no longer owe on the debt, that because the company charged something off and it appears on their credit report that way, that they no longer owe it, it doesn't exist. But in reality, it's just a term of art or an accounting mechanism for the creditor, where they put it from their positive side of the books to the negative side of the books. So when they write it off, it really doesn't mean that somebody doesn't owe it anymore. At that point, they can still have it within their in-house collections department, or they can send it out for collections. When they send it out for collections, they hire a debt collection firm that attempts to collect the debt. And a lot of times they don't succeed, and then they return the debt back to the creditor. The creditor then hires another debt collection law firm, and this process repeats. If there's no success, then at some point they will actually sell the debt to a debt buyer. And some people think that debt buyers or all debt collectors are debt buyers, which isn't the case. So there's this complex web of relationships between the original creditors, the debt collectors, and the debt buyers. When the debt buyer purchases the debt, actually what they purchase is just a spreadsheet with the account name, the name of the individual, and their social security number. So unlike the original creditor and unlike the debt collection companies that were hired by the original creditor, they have much more limited information, and therefore their chances of success are a lot more limited as well. And that's, I think. Hold on.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah.
Are those folks, the second level folks, are they given verification of the debt?
So the question is, are the second level folks giving the verification of the debt? The second level are the debt collectors hired by original creditor. They send letters to the, they make phone calls, but they also send letters to the debtor, and they say that the amount is owed. If you send a verification letter at that point, they have to respond, correct?
In my experience, especially with debt buyers, rarely do they send the validation letter within 5 days of the initial contact. It's something you should always look for. They're supposed to. They're required by law to do so, but in my experience, rarely do they do it.
And from what I've seen, what actually happens a lot if it's the second level is they get the debt validation letter, and instead of responding, they return it back to the original creditor, and then the original creditor hires somebody else. So when people who routinely send those debt validation letters actually get a lot of debt collectors or different companies contacting them on the same debt throughout a short period of time, and I think it's for that reason. So how do people end up in collection lawsuits? It's life. I mean, you'll come across different people, obviously, with different stories in Claro sessions. We have probably had a couple who just were overly optimistic and used their credit and just, for one reason or the other, are not paying, even though they could possibly go get a job and meet their obligations. But for the most part, that's not the case. For the most part, you have people who had unforeseen medical debt. Something awful happened in their family. There was a death in the family. Unforeseen expenses with their houses. And job loss, especially in this market for the last few years. People who lose jobs and find employment but are not getting paid the same amount of money that they used to end up in these situations. We've come across a couple of victims of identity theft. So identity theft, mistake or fraud is another category. Then you have retail ripoff or deals gone bad. There are many reasons, and some of them are stereotypical, but you'll come across all kinds of things. The collection lawsuits are locally filed in city courts and Supreme Courts. This chart is more for the entire state, including New York City, where their structure is a lot more complex than here. But this project is tailored specifically for Buffalo City Court. We've met with Judge Amadeo, the administrative judge for Buffalo City Court. We're set up there on Fridays. We're planning, as Lauren mentioned, to start these new sessions on, maybe beginning of the year, where we will walk up with the visitors and actually go to the hearing with them. However, if somebody walks in through the door and they were sued in Supreme Court, we will absolutely help them. We have forms that we use for answers and motions to vacate and so on and so forth. We're expanding our bank of forms all the time, and there's no reason why we can't use them in Supreme Court. If somebody comes in from other city courts, we had somebody from Tonawanda City Court. Same thing. I mean, we may not be able to advise them where to go and file things specifically, what room you go to, but as far as the actual forms go, we should be able to help them. And to sort of conclude why Claro section of this, we ran the statistic when we were just thinking about launching Claro Buffalo. And in 2010, in Buffalo City Court, there were 16,908 lawsuits filed. Of those, 15,201, which is almost 90%, were consumer credit lawsuits. Now, I'm talking about just civil cases, not criminal cases. And in those consumer